yesterday on a stretch of water that typically sees millions of barrels of oil pass through.
Millions, yeah.
Right? Millions. And thousands of tons of cargo every few hours. Exactly 7 ships crossed.
That's 7.
7. It's unbelievable. And to understand why those waters are suddenly, a complete ghost town and why the price of your groceries is about to skyrocket, well, we have to look at a 70-year-old military treaty that is currently tearing the European continent apart.
It really is an incredibly sobering picture. I mean,
Yeah.
we are watching this massive convergence of military, economic, and political events that frankly alters the foundational mechanics of international relations as we've understood them since the mid-20th century.
Yeah. So today is April 1st, 2026, and you, our listener, have handed us this really intense stack of highly sensitive intelligence briefings.
Geopolitical data sets, global economic impact reports. It's a lot.
It's a massive amount of data, and our mission for this deep dive is to cut through that heavy fog of war and dissect the mechanics of what analysts are now calling the triple crisis. Because we are looking at a hot war involving the U.S. and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. And that military conflict is causing a massive global energy strangulation.
It's a total chokehold, really.
Exactly. And that strangulation is pushing the NATO alliance to the absolute brink of total collapse. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the political chaos in Washington or London, we first have to look at the physical map.
We do.
The root of this entire global meltdown traces back to one localized, really narrow waterway, the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, that is the physical chokehold of this whole crisis.
Yeah.
When we look at the maritime data you provided, traffic through the strait is down a staggering 94% since March 1st.
Wow. 94%.
Yeah. And the intelligence briefings describe Iran's strategy here as selective control.
Wait, I want to pause there because selective control sounds like I don't know, polite bureaucratic term.
It does, yeah.
When I read that, I pictured a giant physical barricade, like a toll booth on the ocean. But how are they actually doing this? I mean, how do you selectively control a massive body of water?
It's a great question, actually, because a blockade in the 21st century isn't, a solid wall of warships locking arms. It's not the 1800s.
Right.
It is entirely about the projection of severe risk. So Iran is utilizing this combination of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, fast attack craft, deployment of smart sea mines, and these loitering drone swarms.
So they're everywhere, basically.
Right. But they aren't necessarily boarding every single vessel. They don't have to. They're just creating an environment so intensely hazardous that the global maritime insurance market simply collapses.
Ah, so the physical weapons trigger a financial blockade.
That is exactly the mechanism. The global shipping industry relies entirely on what analysts call capital clarity.
Capital clarity.
Right, which is the ability to forecast risk, secure maritime insurance, and, guarantee supply chains. When Iran demonstrates they can strike at will,
The insurers panic.
completely. Maritime insurers at Lloyd's of London instantly revoke coverage, or they raise war risk premiums by thousands of percent.
That
Yeah. And if a shipping company cannot insure a $100 million tanker and its cargo, well, that ship does not sail.
it just sits there.
Exactly. Capital clarity is destroyed. The
Yeah.
physical threat removes the financial viability of even crossing the strait.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about the fear of a ship sinking, it's the mathematical certainty that the voyage is financially ruinous.
Right.
And the resulting numbers in these reports are terrifying. Right now, 20% of the world's entire oil supply and nearly a fifth of its liquefied natural gas is just sitting at port,
Stranded.
stranded. Because of that, Brent crude has rocketed past $120 a barrel.
Which really shatters the illusion we often have about our modern economy.
What do you mean?
Well, we tend to operate under this assumption that we live in a weightless, cloud-based digital world. But this crisis proves that our entire digital ecosystem is still completely a slave to the physical pipe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if the physical ships do not move, the global economy just grinds to a halt.
And for you, listening right now, this physical reality manifests in your daily life almost instantly. The economic contagion doesn't just stay in the Gulf.
Not at all.
The data sets highlight the UK as a prime example here. In just 3 weeks, the price of petrol in the UK has shot up 14 pence per litre.
It's incredible.
Their consumer price index, which is the core measure of inflation, is now projected to hit 3.5%. And we aren't just talking about the cost of commuting either. We are talking about the grocery emergency playing out in the Middle East right now.
Right, the food costs.
Yes.
Well,
Food costs in the Gulf states have spiked anywhere from 40 to 120%. It's like a global economic cardiac arrest. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's jugular, and right now, a glowing red line has just snapped shit across it.
that is a very accurate way to put it. And it brings us to a critical concept mentioned in the reports, the food-energy nexus.
The food-energy nexus.
Yeah. People naturally tend to categorize the energy market and the agricultural market as, two separate silos. But they are biologically and chemically intertwined.
Because the ships stuck behind the blockade aren't just carrying fuel, they are carrying fertilizer.
Exactly. But it's even deeper than that. Natural gas is not just a fuel source used to power tractors or transport goods. It is the fundamental chemical feedstock required to manufacture synthetic nitrogen fertilizers.
Oh, I see.
So without natural gas, the actual chemical process that creates modern fertilizer stops. Without fertilizer, crop yields plummet. And even if you have the food grown somewhere else, the physical shipping lanes required to import that grain are locked down.
It's like pulling a single vital screw out of a factory assembly line.
Yes.
The machine doesn't just slow down, it halts completely. You have Gulf states, nations with immense sovereign wealth, suddenly facing a 120% increase in the cost of basic food staples.
Because the money doesn't matter.
Right. All the money in the world is utterly useless if the specific physical vessel carrying the specific agricultural product you need is stuck in a geopolitical traffic jam.
Exactly. That intense, rapid physical pressure on an interconnected system is immense. And historically, when you apply that level of friction to a global economy, it is the weakest political seams that burst first.
Which is the perfect transition to the second massive crisis in your sources. If the economic pain is this severe, if British citizens are paying 14 pence more for petrol and Gulf states are facing a grocery emergency, why hasn't a joint European and American naval task force simply sailed into the strait to clear it?
Right.
The answer is that the most significant military alliance of the modern era is currently fracturing. Let's look at President Trump's ultimatum.
Yes, the physical blockade has triggered a massive political shockwave from Washington. And the target of that shockwave is the NATO alliance itself.
The details in the April 1st briefing are just explosive. President Trump gave an interview to The Telegraph this morning, and he didn't just criticize NATO, he completely eviscerated the concept of it.
He really did.
He called the alliance a paper tiger and stated that a total United States exit from NATO is beyond reconsideration.
And paper tiger is a phrase carrying immense geopolitical weight. I mean, it suggests the alliance projects a fierce outward appearance, but is fundamentally hollow, like it only functions because it is propped up by American military might.
Right, and he coupled that rhetoric with a direct, really aggressive demand. The ultimatum issued to the European allies is this: either you send your own warships to the Gulf to break this Iranian blockade, or you lose the American security umbrella forever.
Yeah, he explicitly called the allies cowards for refusing to join the direct military strikes on Tehran.
But wait, I'm struggling to reconcile this timeline here. Let me push back on Washington's logic for a second. The U.S. and Israel are currently engaged in a hot war with Iran, and that specific military conflict triggered the blockade.
Yeah.
So analytically speaking, isn't Washington threatening to abandon Europe unless Europe commits its own military to clean up a geopolitical mess that Washington helped create? Here's where it gets really interesting. Is this effectively a second layer of blackmail? We have Iran physically blackmailing the world with oil, and now the U.S. is politically blackmailing Europe with security. Was the one-for-all promise of NATO always just waiting to be replaced by pay-to-play?
What's fascinating here is how that exact perception is driving the fracture.
Yeah.
You are highlighting the core mechanism of what analysts in the reports are calling energy blackmail.
Okay.
But it's actually, as you said, a dual blackmail scenario.
Yeah.
On one side, you have Iran leveraging the physical denial of energy to pressure the international community.
Right.
And on the other side, the Trump administration is leveraging the threat of withdrawing security, a security that Europe desperately needs precisely because of the ensuing energy crisis, as political leverage to force Europe into a hot war.
So the unconditional shield of NATO is being converted into a transactional protection racket, a literal pay-to-play system.
That is the psychological rupture. Since 1949, the bedrock of Western security has been Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, right? The doctrine that an attack on one is an attack on all.
It was supposed to be absolute.
Exactly. It was designed to be absolute. If the United States treats the alliance not as a mutual defense pact, but as leverage demanding participation in offensive operations outside the treaty's original scope in exchange for continued protection, it fundamentally rewrites the geopolitical rules of the last 70 years.
Yeah, and if the U.S. is abruptly altering the fundamental deal, how does the continent react to dual extortion? I mean, you've got an American president demanding they sail into a war zone and an Iranian blockade bankrupting their economies. They are caught right in the middle.
They react by splintering.
Splintering.
Yeah. The intelligence briefings reveal a deeply concerning trend for the concept of Western unity. Instead of consolidating in the face of this unprecedented pressure, the European continent is fracturing into distinct, highly divergent survival strategies.
They're abandoning the follow-the-leader model.
Completely. The old paradigm of standing shoulder to shoulder behind Washington has evaporated. We are witnessing the emergence of an every nation for itself reality based on their individual vulnerabilities.
Let's break down exactly what that splintering looks like. The sources detail the reactions of three major European powers, and they are completely at odds with one another. Let's start with Spain, because their response is a massive physical escalation of defiance.
Yes, analysts are calling Spain's reaction a tectonic shift in European defense. Prime Minister Sanchez has actively positioned Spain at the head of a neutrality bloc, arguing that the U.S. aggression and strikes on Tehran violate international law.
But it's not just a diplomatic statement, right? They actually took physical action.
They did.
Spain has closed its airspace to any United States combat flights involved in the Iran strikes. And even further, they have restricted the U.S. military from using the Rota and Meran air bases.
And to grasp why that is a tectonic shift, we have to look at the mechanics of military logistics and what analysts call the sovereign risk matrix.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
Well, the naval station at Rota and the airbase of Meran are not just standard facilities. They are critical logistical hubs for U.S. force projection into the Mediterranean and the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Meran is essential for staging aerial refueling tankers. If the U.S. cannot fly combat missions through Spanish airspace or stage logistics from those bases, it requires insanely long, complex, and expensive operational detours.
So Spain is physically hamstringing the U.S. military's operational capacity.
They are. Spain is looking at their sovereign risk matrix and calculating that maintaining international legal neutrality and avoiding getting dragged into a Middle Eastern war is worth the severe diplomatic fallout of crippling American force projection. They are prioritizing their long-term sovereign posture over short-term American favor.
Which is a massive gamble. Now contrast that with France, who the briefings describe as walking a razor's edge. They aren't fully locking the Americans out, but they aren't joining the fight either.
Right. France is attempting an incredibly difficult balancing act. They've flatly refused to allow any NATO assets to be deployed to the Gulf for combat operations.
But they kept the bases open.
Partially. Unlike Spain, they're still allowing base usage, but strictly and exclusively for non-combat logistics.
And President Macron has been highly vocal during this crisis, warning that Europe must immediately pursue strategic autonomy. He's arguing that if Europe doesn't decouple from its reliance on the U.S., the continent will be dragged into a century of American-led energy wars. But why is France the one pushing this so hard? Why do they feel they have the luxury to try and launch a rival strategic framework right now when everyone else is panicking?
It comes down to the underlying infrastructure of their domestic economy. France generates roughly 70% of its electricity from its own domestic nuclear power fleet.
Ah, the nuclear buffer.
Exactly. While they are still impacted by global inflation and oil prices for transportation, their fundamental power grid is largely insulated from the liquefied natural gas shock caused by the Hormuz blockade.
That's huge.
Because their lights won't go out if Middle Eastern gas stops flowing, they possess the geopolitical leverage to say no to Washington. Their energy independence affords them diplomatic independence.
That is a crucial insight. Their nuclear grid literally dictates their foreign policy bandwidth. Which brings us to the United Kingdom, where the situation is entirely different. The briefings paint a grim picture for Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He is caught in what looks like an impossible squeeze.
Yeah, the UK situation is the textbook example of how domestic reality severely constrains foreign policy. The UK relies heavily on natural gas for both heating homes and generating electricity.
So they are totally exposed.
Deeply structurally exposed to the physical chokehold in the strait.
We discussed their inflation numbers earlier, the 14 pence jump in petrol, but the reports note that food inflation in the UK is hitting double digits because of those trapped fertilizer shipments.
Yes.
And on top of the economic pain, there are active warnings about the lights literally flickering in London due to the severe strain on the energy grid.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Oh,
Prime Minister Starmer is under extreme domestic pressure. His populace is suffering tangible, immediate economic pain. Yet, he is trying to hold the line on the UK's historical commitment to NATO and the special relationship with the United States.
but analytically, how long can any leader maintain that posture? I mean, if the U.S. is demanding they join a war to theoretically lower the price of oil, but joining that war might trigger a massive regional escalation that permanently cuts off all fuel and plunges London into rolling blackouts. There is no good option.
There isn't. The UK's crisis demonstrates that grand international alliances quickly lose their luster when a nation is facing internal economic collapse.
Right.
Starmer is forced to balance the abstract geopolitical value of the special relationship against the visceral anger of citizens who cannot afford to eat or heat their homes.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at this map of Europe we've just charted, it's like watching a massive corporate bankruptcy play out in real time.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, Spain has essentially quit, changed the locks on the doors, and declared neutrality. France is trying to use its independent capital to launch a rival startup called Strategic Autonomy and poach the remaining staff. And the UK is just desperately trying to keep the lights on in the crumbling old office while reviewing the special relationship against its own national interests, trying to figure out how to simply survive the quarter.
It's an excellent way to visualize the sovereign risk calculation. Every single nation is staring at their own ledger. They are weighing the catastrophic cost of U.S. abandonment against the equally catastrophic cost of joining a regional war.
Yeah.
Because the threat of dual blackmail is so severe, the traditional architecture of the alliance has broken down. The mutual trust and guaranteed security that held NATO together for over 7 decades has simply dissolved under the crushing pressure of $120 oil and political ultimatums.
It is genuinely staggering to realize how fast the dominoes can fall. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, pulling from these incredibly detailed sources. We started by looking at a physical mechanism, how drones and fast attack craft destroyed maritime insurance, leading to a 94% drop in traffic in the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
We traced how that localized physical chokehold stranded a fifth of the world's oil, sending Brent crude soaring past $120 a barrel and shutting down the fertilizer supply chains, which triggered a global economic contagion that is driving up the cost of groceries and fuel for everyday people.
And then we explored how that intense economic pressure created a vulnerability for political extortion.
Exactly.
We analyzed President Trump's ultimatum threatening the existence of NATO by demanding Europe join a hot war or lose their security umbrella, which fundamentally shifts the alliance from collective defense to a transactional arrangement.
And finally, we examined the mechanics of Europe's fracture under that dual blackmail. We saw Spain leveraging its bases to force neutrality, France utilizing its nuclear independence to push for strategic autonomy, and the UK buckling under the impossible weight of an exposed energy grid and domestic inflation.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. The fog of war is thick right now, but the intelligence you've provided paints a painfully stark picture. We are truly living on the edge of the strait. As we look toward the coming months, the world faces a brutal binary choice. Either we see a radical de-escalation in the Gulf, or we witness the permanent collapse of the global order as we've known it.
You know, if we connect all these mechanisms to the bigger picture, this 2026 crisis proves something profound. Despite all our incredible advancements in digital technology, despite the push toward green energy and cloud-based economies, our entire modern world can still be brought to its knees by the blockade of a single, narrow waterway and the fracturing of a single treaty. It makes you wonder, have our modern, highly interconnected systems actually made us more advanced, or just infinitely more fragile?
That is the exact question we all need to be asking right now. The global assembly line has halted, and we are waiting to see who blinks first. We'll be keeping a close watch on this data for you. Until next time.